Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today, and today we're doing our regular feature, which is our news roundup and Ask Me Anything episode for January of 2025. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to remind everybody that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode, is sponsored by the members of The Chocolate Life. You can go over to The Chocolate Life right now. This is the homepage. And if you're not a member, you can click up on this green link. I'm logged in, so it says account for me, but it'll say join for you. There's always a free membership. And but there are also memberships where you can support the work that we do here at The Chocolate Life. Whichever way you go, I very, very much appreciate the support that everybody gives me. And I also want to remind everybody that for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post on The Chocolate Life. And this post is going to contain an overview of what the episode is all about, but it's also going to provide links to what it is that I'm saying. And one of the reasons why I do this is it provides a run of show for me with a table of contents about what it is that I'm going to talk about. But and I think more importantly for you, is that I do audio podcast versions. So if you click up here and you go look at the archives, it'll say the audio podcasts, and you can go listen to these. And if you're listening to them, you can follow along on the post. Or if you're watching later, you can follow along on the post and figure out what it is that's going on, right? So you don't actually have to just listen to me. You don't have to concentrate on getting the URLs to the pages or anything like that. You can go and look at these things in depth yourself. What I'm doing is I'm citing my sources, right? Which I think is really important. I'm not asking you to do your own research. What I suggest you do is you do your own fact checking, right? You can choose to believe me. I get things wrong. And I'm happy to acknowledge when I do get things wrong. If you do some fact checking and you say, hey, Clay, maybe you haven't considered something or your interpretation may be different. And of course, what you can do if you find that is you can go down into the comments in the member discussion and say, hey, Clay, there might be a quick change. And I do want to thank Mark and Yuri from Blue Spruce Chocolate in Kittredge, Colorado, for checking in today. Thanks very much. It's cold. It was -6 degrees centigrade here, so it was low upper teens, as I want to say. So for those people who are not conversant in centigrade to Fahrenheit conversion. So it was a chilly morning here this morning. I doubt that it was quite as chilly as it was where you were in Colorado. But thanks. But this is a reminder to everyone who's watching, whether on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, go into the live chat on YouTube or the comments on LinkedIn and Facebook and give me a quick shout out. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from, and I will get that comment up on screen. And if you have a question about anything that I say today, you can get that up and I will do my best to answer it, because this is not just my talking about the news. It's about AMA, Ask Me Anything, and I will go and work on it. So with all that, what I want to do is I want to start off very, very quickly. I'm going to go through a lot of this stuff very, very quickly because I think it's important. So number one is there's a private Facebook group. That private Facebook group is the Cocotera VIP's Facebook group. I'm not going to show you things because I don't want to out anybody as a member of the group. It's not my job to dox anybody. But there's a discussion about, hey, none of the 2024 commitments to shipping have happened. And so just a quick note, they've been taking pre-orders for quite some time now. They're not shipping. They're not being open and transparent. And I'm listening to the comments and I'm reading things about that's going on. So if you're interested in the Cocotera machine, my guess is no, don't buy one yet. Wait until they're shipping. Wait until they've got through their backlog. And that includes the Pro machine. Just don't do it. I did reach out to the founder, Nate Saul, and he said, hey, is there a Pro machine for review? He said no. So hopefully at some point there'll be a Pro machine review. I can let you know and I can let you know about it. I did do a really, I'm sorry, this is what I wanted to do. Oh, I've got the wrong thing here. I just wanted to point out, I think it's really interesting. This is my search engine Perplexity, which is an AI search engine. And what they're doing, which is interesting, is they're saying, okay, the machine supports chocolatiering, which I think is an interesting verb tense that I hadn't really paid much attention to more. But what I want to suggest is here is a link to the Wayback Machine. And you can go and look at the Wayback Machine. If you look at the earliest entries for Cocoa Terra. It's for a German company that made coconut products. So they originally registered the URL. At some point, the current owners purchased the domain name, and you can go and you can look and you can see how the discussion, how the presentation about the machine has changed over time. It's pretty interesting. I was going to go into it, but Mark, you asked me a bunch of questions, and so I'm going to gloss over what that is. But it's it's going to be interesting but slow, because at least on my end, getting all these pages is relatively slow. But go take a look at it, and you can find some idea about the history of the company and the way they've been talking about the machine. Again, currently not delivering the machine, which is unfortunate. But my advice is it could be interesting. And one of the ways in which it could be interesting is for cocoa bean analysis. So what you want to do is you very, very quickly want to take some cocoa beans, you've roasted them, cracked and winnowed them, and you want to do a quick recipe just to find out what you think of that roast. And I think that for a chocolate maker, you could do that much faster in a machine like this compared with a melanger, right? So, but keep in mind that nothing that you really know about the recipe or the timing or anything like that transfers. All you're going to do is you're going to get an idea that, oh, this bean could make an interesting chocolate. I don't know. So will the Cacao of Excellence take this up because it's much faster than using a melanger? I think that would be the validation that I would look for, to see if this was a thing that's going to be a big thing going forward. Otherwise, the size, 250 grams. Again, the challenge is if you're a chocolate maker, you can do a quick analysis about whether the beans are interesting or the roast profile is interesting, but it doesn't necessarily dial you into, oh, I'm going from a 250 gram ball mill to a 20 kilogram melanger. I mean, it's not going to help you in recipe development in that respect. Just a quick note. All right. So having said that, the next thing is a headline. I am going to be able, I just changed my navigation here. So I'm going to zoom up a little bit. And again, you don't have to follow this along. You can look at it. If I have any highlights there for me, they're not going to be on the pages that you see. But it says here that scientists have uncovered an unexpected ally that could help the world's declining chocolate supply. Our results suggest a clear back forward. And I have no idea what the site is, Total Cooldown. Is that what it's called? The Cooldown. I have no idea what the background of Simon Sage is on this particular topic and what he's reporting. But what they're suggesting is that if you're in an agroforestry system, right, that the choice of trees, specifically the way the trees leave, the shape of the leaves, again, phylogeny is covered. So the shape of the leaves, as well as when the leaves start to bud and when they fall off, if they do fall off. So we need to look at particular characteristics to be able to discover, oh, this would be cool. So it makes sense that in an agroforestry system, that the choice of trees makes a lot of sense. However, the choice of trees may not be what you think the choice of trees should be. Interestingly enough, I look through this and there's no mention. I'm just doing a quick search on the page for the word finance. Nobody's talking about who's going to finance, right? So when we talk about a clear path forward to save the world's declining chocolate supply, unless we figure out who's going to pay for this, it's not really an answer. But they do cite an actual research study. So here it is. The study is, I linked to it. You can go to it and see it yourself, download the PDF. I believe you can download the PDF. It says that functional groups of phenology, so the phenotypes of the leaves, are key to building climate resilience in cocoa agroforestry systems. Very, very cool. So if you are a cocoa farmer and you're interested in building resilience and you have the resources to plant or replant your farm in a way that supports agroforestry, so you're not doing open sun and you're not doing just shade for shade's sake, but you really want to think about how the trees contribute to the productivity of the cocoa, then this is going to be a really interesting article for you, because they actually go through and they talk about the kinds of trees you want to be planting. Right. Which is, I think, the value of this study, right? They say the kinds of trees that you want to plant in order to be able to build in climate resistance or climate resilience into your agroforestry system, right? And again, I'm looking through this and I'm saying, tell me about the word finance. The only time they talk about the word finance is they financing for the research. They don't talk about, hey, I'm a small cocoa farmer. How do I go finance buying all the trees and planting all the trees and everything that needs to get done to maintain the agroforestry system? And how do I do that? You know, how much per year is it going to take me? And what is the ROI? So that's the next thing I'd like to see in a study like this is what is the actual cost? So they do talk about materials and methods, right? And they do talk about the results, right? And you know, this is again the important thing, but they don't talk about what the cost is going to be. And I'd really like to know what that is, right? Don't talk about it here. But I think it's the next bit of research that I think needs to be done to say, is this a 3-year ROI? Is it a 5-year ROI? What is the upfront investment? What is the annual cost in terms of labor and other things that need to be invested in order to be able to implement systems like this? And then we could say, oh, if I need to do this on 100,000 farms in Ghana, it's going to cost this much money. If I'm going to do it on 1 million farms in Ghana, it's going to cost, well, there aren't 1 million farms, 800,000, whatever that. We get an idea about how much it's going to cost, and then we can figure out where is that money coming from. Really, really important. I would like to see. Uh, there were, next stop, going on, just bang, 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 because I want to make sure I get to Mark's questions. Bang, bang, bang. There are a whole lot of recent talks about FDA announcements and around the definition of healthy and other things. These things are likely to come to an end. So if there's not, it's hard to know what's going to happen over the course of the next 4 years once the old new president comes, takes possession of the presidency in what, 2 weeks, 10 days or so, 10 days, 11 days. Whether or not the FDA or the USDA and related agencies are going to continue to act for good, or going to be doing things to actually just administratively make sure that none of these things happen. No way to know. None. But first, okay, let's go through. So first one is the FDA has updated the definition for what qualifies as a healthy food. And rather than read it through, and again, you're not going to get my highlights in yellow or blue when you watch this. These are for me because I'm doing the highlighting, right? So under the new rule, products that claim to be healthy must contain a certain amount of food for one or more food groups, such as fruits, vegetables, grains, dairy, and protein. So cocoa doesn't qualify as a grain or a vegetable, I don't think, in this particular context. So chocolate probably can't be listed as a healthy food. And for the first time, the rule set certain limits for added sugars, sodium, and saturated fat. So just to let you know, if you are interested, that's this. But you can go to the FDA website. And the FDA website use of the term healthy on food labeling. And you can come down here and you say, here are products that will now qualify as healthy that used to not qualify as healthy. Olive oil will now be considered as healthy, eggs, right? Low-fat yogurt, anything which does not have a lot of sugar in it. Salmon water is now qualified, can be labeled as healthy, which is duh, right? But if we actually search through the word chocolate on this page, we find that there are no definitions for chocolate as healthy food. So we can't make any declarations that chocolate is healthy under the context of FDA labeling. So we did talk about these labeling regulations. There are more general nutrition food labeling and critical foods that are here. This is the link to the page so you can understand what front of package labeling requirements are. If you're going to call it gluten-free, things having to do with added sugar, how you have to label them, and what critical foods are. Chocolate is not a critical food. So you can go to this page and you have links to all of the nutrition and food labeling and critical foods. However, I don't know if this has been updated yet to include the new definitions for healthy. And I take a look at this as a 10/1/2024. So the answer is probably not. So you're going to actually have to go look at healthy separately from this. Now, what I did do is I wanted to look and say, okay, as a result of looking through all these things, if chocolate cannot be considered a healthy food, um, is it an ultra processed food? Okay, so I looked up this and found this page for something called the NOVA classification on Wikipedia, and it defines how foods are, classified according to this system, right? Nova Classificação, new classification, a framework for grouping edible substances based on the extent and purpose of the food processing that is applied to them. And so I would recommend that anybody who's wants to think about how to talk about their chocolate and to differentiate chocolate, like 2-ingredient chocolate and 3-ingredient chocolate, from chocolate candy, this is a good place to start to think about that differentiation if you're struggling with that differentiation. So I think it's really, really cool that if you go and you look at ultra processed foods, we have Fruit Loops, yay. I did take a look, is that cereal, especially sweetened kid cereal, can no longer, will no longer, when the legislation is in full effect, be able to be advertised as part of this healthy breakfast, right? So if you've got really unhealthy, according to the guidelines, sweet cereal, that even if you put a banana next to it or you put milk next to it, you can't call it part of this healthy breakfast anymore. But ultra processed. So this talks about what ultra processed means, what processing and ultra processing means. So you have unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So if you're taking cocoa nibs, or you're taking cocoa beans and you're selling cocoa nibs, unprocessed or minimally processed for sure, because so group includes minimally processed foods, which are unprocessed foods modified through industrial methods such as the removable unwanted parts, cracking and winnowing, crushing, drying, fractioning, grinding, pasteurization, heating, cooling, fermentation, freezing, and other preservation techniques that maintain the food's integrity and do not introduce salt, sugar, oils, fats, or other culinary ingredients. So if you're doing a 2-ingredient chocolate, you can definitely call it an unprocessed or minimally processed food. Cocoa butter, so they do not introduce oils and fats. Okay, so if you're doing a 3-ingredient chocolate, probably it's not a minimally processed, probably not minimally processed. Processed culinary ingredients are derived from group 1 foods, or else from nature, from pressing, which would be cocoa butter, although you're adding it as a fat or oil, so it doesn't fit. They're free from additives. The ingredients are primarily used in seasoning and cooking group 1 foods and preparing such dishes from scratch. So cocoa butter is not it. Typically free from additives, but some products in the group may include vitamins and minerals such as iodized salt. Right? So chocolate is not a processed culinary ingredient in generally, although cocoa butter could be considered to be a processed culinary ingredient, but not by adding it into refined cocoa nibs, right? And actually, we'd have to think of paste, so cacao paste, because we can't introduce sugar or sweetener into it. So this is cocoa nibs, cocoa paste, unprocessed or minimally processed. Cocoa butter might be considered to be a processed culinary ingredients, and then it's a processed food. So chocolate falls under the definition of a processed food. So it's it, and it doesn't generally follow something that we would think of as a minimally processed food when I think about a 2-ingredient chocolate bar, so cacao beans and sugar, or cocoa nibs and sugar, right? So processed foods are made or preserved through baking, boiling, canning, bottling, non-alcoholic fermentation. They use additives to enhance shelf life, protect the properties of unpressed food, prevent the spread. So you can have cheese, canned vegetables, salted nuts, all right, breads, bakeries, cakes, biscuits, snacks, and some meat products, when they are predominantly group 1 foods with the addition of ingredients. So it's interesting to note that chocolate is not listed, specifically by name. So we don't have cocoa here. We don't have cacao. It's not listed on the page. So, is that true? No, cacao. Oh, classificação. So we're looking at the Portuguese, a Portuguese spelling. So anyway, so it's important. But on this page, there's a discussion of what makes up an ultra processed food. And chocolate, if you look at it, if you do not include any of the ingredients that are listed here or engage in any of the processes that are listed here, you're not an ultra processed food. However, this is the distinction between chocolate and candy. So I could be having a chocolate and introduce, for example, a wafer ingredient as an inclusion. The wafer might be an ultra processed food, right? But the chocolate itself would not. And so it's, if I've got a lot of sugar, especially if I'm using high fructose corn syrup or fructose generally, as opposed to sugar, if I'm using something else, it says here invert sugar, maltodextrose, lactose. Right, this is where we get into the definition of ultra processed foods. And I would say there's another category 5, which is a hyper processed food, which is an ultra processed food made from ultra processed foods. So very, 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 very good and succinct way to say, oh, how would I classify, if anybody asks, right? I think that one of the challenges we have these days is that you need to have an answer to the questions, which is easy to understand and easily formulated, so that people will know that you're not prevaricating, you're not making something up. So saying, okay, we are in fact, technically, we are what is called a processed food, as opposed to an ingredient, as opposed to an unprocessed or minimally processed food, or an ultra processed food. Just good to know where you cross that line, especially when it comes to the new labels, when it comes to healthy. And this is why this came up. I was looking at healthy, and then we have these things, and I'm going, oh, what is it? What is a processed food? So, and there is actually a bit of research. PubMed at the National Library of Medicine, there was a research report. It's about 18 months, almost 2 years old now. 18 months old. Can chocolate be classified as an ultra-processed food? A short review on the processing and health aspects. And in the abstract, the authors of the study say, in their view, chocolate should not be classified as an ultra-processed food because of simple processing step, limited ingredients, and being an important part of a healthy diet. Well, again, healthy is now defined differently than when this study was written, but you get the idea. So this will give you a whole lot of language that you can use to talk about. There's some history. I don't know why all these things go into history. And this is actually where I found the NOVA classification, was from this study, right? So you can go, it's just really, really, really useful. It's not a long read, but I think it makes sense. And again, I've linked to this study, and you can download, I believe you can download it. Yep, you can download it. So you can have a local copy. Interesting to know. Along with that, right, we have new guidance. So I believe this is final guidance. Is that true? Yes, it is final guidance from the FDA on lead in processed food intended for babies and young children. This will give you an idea. This is the FDA requirement. This is the U.S. national requirement. It does not supersede California Prop 65 levels, but this is any place outside of California in the United States. 10 parts per billion for fruits, vegetables, mixtures, including grain and meat-based mixture, yogurt, custard. And so this is for children, right? And so this seems to be 10 parts per billion. This seems to be inappropriate. If you can be at this level, you don't have any problems whatsoever in doing things. In being compliant, I would need to do a little bit more work to find out how this relates to California. But just, you can find out what the FDA guidance is. Number one is it's going into effect, which is important. It's part of a larger FDA effort called Closer to Zero, which you may want to learn more about. So processed food in this guidance refers to packaged food: jars, patches, tubs, boxes. Represented reported to be for babies, young children less than 2 years old. It includes ready-to-eat foods. So chocolate is in a box often, right? And so there's very little chocolate that's intended for under 2-year-olds, which is important to know, but it does give you an idea for how to consider whether or not the product that you're making conforms to federal guidelines. Um, we can take a look and say, what is the difference between young children? I would prefer body weight rather than age, which is, I think, a real mistake that's being done here, because it doesn't necessarily have to do with the age of the person. It has to do with their body weight. It has as much or more to do with their body weight than anything else. But it's important to know that, again, because of the incoming administration, I do not expect to see anything like this in the next 4 years. So with the proposed dismantling of the administrative state, I do not expect to see any guidance in the next 4 years during the course of the incoming administration having to do with lead for adults or cadmium for children or cadmium adults. I just don't expect to see anything in the next couple of years. I would be really surprised. I would be really surprised if we saw anything. Is probably a better way to go about thinking about it. And so Prop 65 rules if you want to sell in the state of California. Now, along those lines, Gavin Newsom, if you're in the state of California, Gavin Newsom signed recently an executive order, which means that irrespective of what the federal guidelines are going to be, there is a definition for healthy food. And so if you're in California or you're selling into California, you're going to want to take a look at this executive order and see how it applies to you, if it applies to you, right? So, and there's lots of really interesting language about links to other things that you may or may not have been aware of. So really good, really good resource in that sense. But they do talk to federal guidelines. So U.S. Department of Agriculture's 2025 Dietary Guidance Committee introduced a systematic review in 2024. There's a link between consumption of ultra-processed food and greater risk of obesity. That may be the redefinition of healthy, which was introduced just recently. So go take a look at it, see if there's anything here having to do with California, whether you reside in California. Oh, and by the way, I know that at least one person here, which is going to be Chef Jeffrey Gardner at Marsada in Torrance, California. To anybody who's in Los Angeles and who's been affected by the fires, I mean, I mean, I grew up in Southern California. I spent most of my childhood between the ages of 4 and 14 in Southern California, 5 and 14, and so I'm familiar with the areas. And I mean, what's going on is just really crazy, really crazy. Devastating for the people who have lost homes and businesses and all that goes around, and community that goes around there, if not loved ones. So last week, I did a post called Trendy Trends Trending. And so I'm going to talk, we're going to go back and talk a little bit about that. But first thing I want to talk about is I get a lot of press releases. And so I can't show you the whole thing because I'm not logged in at the moment. But Dr. Bronner's debuts new look for chocolate bars. And I'm going, oh my gosh, is this newsworthy? Right? The fact that they changed the fonts and they changed the colors. And so if you are involved in any kind of press activity, PR activity, if all you can do is talk about, oh, we changed the fonts, I mean, it's not generally newsworthy. It might be newsworthy. I don't know who it's newsworthy to. I'm going to go into maybe, if I'm going to go into my local grocery store and all of a sudden, oh, the package, because Dr. Bronner's just sold in one of them, these bars. I mean, will I not recognize them anymore? The answer is no, they're not all that different. But it's just, is this newsworthy? I don't think it's worth the bits. They're not talking about new sourcing. They're not talking about new flavors. They're not talking about anything which means anything, I think. And so when you do do a press release or something like that, think about, is what you're doing actually newsworthy? And in this particular case, I don't think so. Let me know. What do you think? Do you think this is a newsworthy update? So given that we talked about trendy trends trending in the last episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, what I do want to do is I want to talk about a couple of more trend things that came my way. So we have in Food Dive, which is a newsletter for professionals. They talk about trends for 2025, food and beverage trends. So number one, GLP-1. So GLP-1 is a class of drugs which are good for um, helping people who have trouble losing weight. But there's an interesting aspect to it, right? A couple of them. So number one, this highlighted phrase I've got here is the new wave of GLP-1 drugs has food companies researching to fulfill the needs of this new consumer base: protein, fiber, less sugar, as well as convenience. All right. So yeah, right. But what's interesting here, and this is going to be really hard to read. So while the diabetes and weight loss drugs do suppress appetite, there is evidence that the medication affect what tastes good to people, and even how they drink, and even what and how they drink, which is interesting. So if I'm on a GLP-1 drug for weight loss, it may turn out that my favorite food no longer tastes any good. And so if you or a family member is on one of these drugs, right? So what you might want to do is you might want to talk to them and saying, you know, how has your taste changed? Because I don't think these drugs are going anywhere any soon. Although I don't know that's necessarily true. Apparently, I'm not going to get into too much politics, but just think about it. So the drugs I take can affect what it is that I'm eating. I love chocolate. I'm on a GLP-1 for weight loss. Is it possible to play with the formulation so that it still tastes good, right? But if you don't have a whole lot of customers who are worried about it, don't worry about it. But it's just an interesting thought. Number two, AI meets the big time. You know, I you know AI is being morphing from being used to crunch large volumes of data to identifying trends. So again, the major point that I made in the last episode was you can go and take advantage of the research that big companies are doing in identifying trends using really, really expensive AI systems and go, how can I take advantage of that in my business? Right. So I don't recommend using AI to design your packaging. I don't recommend your AI to write your website for you. I don't recommend you use AI to write your press releases because they're just going to be generic. You're probably going to spend as much time rewriting as you are writing them. So, but what you can do is you can say, "Ooh, here are all these trends that big industry, right, has um, taken advantage of AI, and here are some things that I can do to take advantage of them." And this is one of the things that we talked about in the last episode to consider. So CPGs, consumer processed goods, FMCGs, fast moving consumer goods, light up portfolios with limited time offerings. Limited time offerings, also known as LTOs, right? So if you're not doing something which is very, very seasonally specific or very, very holiday specific, or is targeted at a specific audience, in June, brides, or in wedding season, brides, something to do with mothers, some just whatever it is you're going to make 100 of them and they're gone, or you're going to make 1,000 of them are gone. So get people to get used to the notion of a term that I call artificial scarcity. So you're going to create a demand for a product by limiting how much of it you make, right? And then you could say, if you like it, if you purchase it this year, you're going to be on the list to purchase it again next year before anybody gets an opportunity to do this. I think the best example of this in chocolate was when Godiva relaunched around its G line in the mid 2010s. It was only available at a small fraction of their company-owned retail stores, as well as at some Neiman Marcus stores, right? And the first year's production was only about 500,000 pieces. And they started selling on Thanksgiving, and it was gone, I think, within the first week or so of December. And they said, sorry, it's not going to be, we're not going to have any more of these until next year. I mean, brilliant job of execution on the introduction of the G line. Didn't do much for Godiva generally. And we look at, a decade later and where is Godiva now, but important to think about. Benefits stacking stack up. So if you have one benefit, stack another benefit on top of it, stack another benefit on top of it, stack another benefit on top of it. So you can reach a group of people. That's what this whole idea of benefit stacking is all about. Clean label, fiber, gut health, low sugar, sustainability, protein. Right? These are all things that where the research suggests that more people are being more cognizant of more of these things. Beverages break category boundaries. Brands are adapting to changing demands with new product lines that serve several purposes at the same time, with energy drinks, cocktails, coffee, soda, and things like that, which says that if you're a chocolate maker, you have the resources and you can find somebody who has got a small bottling line so that you don't need, 1,000 liters or something like that. And what you can do is you can create a shelf stable chocolate beverage. That might be a really, 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 really interesting thing to consider, because other ingredients, right? Chocolate is not the number one ingredients there. There may be water in it. There may be milk in it. There may be, some sort of dairy or non-dairy milk. That might be a way to create a product which includes chocolate, but doesn't necessarily include a lot of chocolate. So something to consider, and that's something that I'm working on as well. So finding ways for small chocolate makers who are interested in getting into the bottled beverage business to be able to do that. Trendy trends trending. I mean, Kellanova, who's the owner of Pop Tarts, has done a licensing ingredient with Krispy Kreme. So there are now a bunch of Pop Tart themed Krispy Kreme donuts. What this suggests, again, from a trending perspective, is that there are a lot of things out there that people love. And if you can identify things that people love and you can incorporate them into your products, you can take care of the brand aura. Now, having a branded product, so Oreo brand wafer cookies, you need to be very, very careful about how you do that and how you use the trademark names. But it's cookies and cream is the way most people get around that. So really, 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 really important thing to consider is look around and see if just wander the shelves of your supermarket, the candy aisle, the snack aisle, and find out how there are brand mashups that you might consider to be unusual, and say, how can I take advantage of that in my business? Really, really interesting concept. I am not a big Krispy Kreme fan. I think they're really way too sweet. I'm trying to remember the last time I had a Pop Tart. That was probably when I was living at home and had a toaster and had children in the house. So it's going to be 2008. It's going to be 15, 16 years since the last time I had a Pop Tart. So this is not something I'm likely to have right now, but it's an interesting concept. Okay, so interesting thing here, more research. This says Americans are drinking less milk, but devouring butter and cheese like never before. Right? Interesting kind of concept. There's not a whole lot of, there are people who have done interesting chocolate cheese combinations. So it can be done. You can take a wedge of an aged chocolate, like a Taleggio or something like that, and then wrap it in chocolate. So that has been done. It's not new. It's been around. Cheese consumption is climbing to more than 40 pounds a year. So it's really just a question of how to figure out how to go and put cheese together with chocolate. I've done it in a fresh context where I've taken a very thin slice of bresaola, which is an air-cured beef, put goat cheese in it, a little bit of baby arugula, and then sprinkled chocolate shavings on top of it. So it turns out that is one way to do it. You're not gonna do it in this context if you want to do something which is shelf stable, unless you're doing something a la minute. But what you can do is you say, ooh, butter. What do I do with butter in my chocolate? And what I would say is there's a very, very simple way to think about this, which is to start making butterscotch rather than caramel. I mean, they're very close. The techniques are very, very similar, but the ingredients lists are different. And so I could make a chewy butterscotch that I enrobed or dipped. I could make a hard butterscotch, which I used as an inclusion or put it on the back of something. So it's not just a salted butter caramel these days, it is a butterscotch, right? And that's a way to combine butter with chocolate. So interesting. So this is the first thing that occurred to me as I was thinking about Americans are devouring more butter than before, is that making butterscotch and including using butterscotch as an inclusion or an ingredient in a product would be doing. So rather, again, if you could make a pipeable butterscotch and put it in a bonbon. Lots of ways you can use butterscotch, and there are lots of recipes for butterscotch out there to play with. So just something to consider. I mean, I'm thinking there's a recipe I saw recently for a butterscotch pumpkin pie. So it had a layer of butterscotch on the bottom and then pumpkin on the top. And there's a great recipe. What you do is you take the pumpkin puree, not the pumpkin pie spice, but the puree, and then what you reduce it in a slow oven down to 50% by weight, which concentrates the flavor and makes it darker. And I'm thinking, maybe a butterscotch and pumpkin. I think that would be really cool. So, and it could be done seasonally. You get the idea, right? So think about butter as an ingredient coming into the next year and what you might do, because people like butter and they're consuming more of it than ever before, even though it is a relatively expensive ingredient. So next to last, 30 most expensive chocolates in the world in 2025. This is from late November of 2024. It's a listicle. Always curious about listicles and how they get put together. But in this particular case, and in most cases, it's obvious. All of a sudden I'm getting advertising because I turned my VPN off. I'm sorry. But the most expensive chocolates in the world, what I want you to do is I want you to go and look at this list, preferably through a VPN because of all the advertising that's here. I apologize for all of that. But go take a look at what it means. 21%. What does 21 cents per gram mean? And is there anything that is, Thomas, yes, it's an incomplete list, but it's a stupid list, right? And one of the ways in which it's stupid is it includes a company that's out of business, right? And this company, which has been out of business, was also proven to be a fraud. I'll put the link to this Dallas Food article on the post. But Noka was just melting Bonat and trying to pass it off on their own. So what I would suggest is you go take a look at this and kind of wonder, how this list got. Why is Ghirardelli on this list of world's most expensive? Not even close, right? And even if it is expensive, is it any good? Why is Swarovski on the list? Because of crystals, right? Why is this golden speckled egg on the list? Because it's got gold. So this is Toac, this art series, Guayasamine. Toac is on the list somewhere else. Don't understand why we have two different ones. Michel Cluizel is legendary. That may be true, but Cluizel is elsewhere on the list. This frozen hot chocolate from Serendipity in New York is about gold, not the quality of the product. It's really, really badly written, right? So, but here's Toac on the list twice. This House of Knipschild, I mean, I love Fritz. I mean, he's been a good friend, I think, for well over 15 years. But if I scroll up here and I take a look at, so here's Cluizel again, and just jumping into it, Dubov & Goulet, almost everything that Dubov & Goulet makes was made by Cluizel last time I was in Paris. And then all of a sudden, we're going in here, and what is all of this stuff that's going on here? I mean, so De La Fay is on the list twice, right? Richard actually, I believe, belongs on this list. But this La Madeleine aux Truffes, it's actually made by Fritz Knipschild. And so why is it a product name and not a company name? And why aren't they together? It's just a really badly constructed list. But, you might want to go through and take a look and go, do you agree with any of these things? Do you not agree with any of these things? And what does price have to do with quality, which is the primary reason to go take a look at it. So last of the things that I want to talk about that I had all put together for today, is that correct? Is that many of you may remember that I was in Venice in 2022 for the launch of Second Generation Chocolate, which is a Barry Callebaut initiative, basically saying, how do we take everything the craft chocolate and specialty chocolate world has been doing since 1996, 1997, and do it on an industrial scale? That's all this was. It's like, we figured out how to make two ingredient dark chocolate. We figured out how to make 3-ingredient dark chocolate. How do you do it? Well, you use good cocoa beans and you ferment and roast them properly. Yay. And all they've done is figure out how to do this in industrial scale rather than a small batch. And so you can go and again, this list that you're going to see here is generated from Perplexity, which is my AI search engine. But you can talk about the key features of second generation chocolate. You can take a look at what the principles are, right? So good farming, good fermenting, good roasting, nothing you and I didn't know already, right? But it turns out that it's nowhere to be seen. So in 2022, Barry Callebaut, the next big thing, appears to be no thing at all. I can't find any recent mention of it. So one of the challenges that you need to be aware of is that when a big company says, here is a trend, or we're trying to create a trend, or we're trying to create a trend around a new product, you need to be very careful because they might get it wrong. So where is Ruby? If you live in Japan, betting on Ruby is a good thing. If you're in the United States, betting on Ruby is not necessarily a good thing. Where are we with whole fruit chocolate? Are other companies doing better with upcycled cocoa pods, upcycled juice, upcycled pulp? The answer is yes, right? So you need to be very careful about how you incorporate the ideas and how much you're going to risk on following them, right? But essentially, if you're a 2-ingredient craft chocolate maker, a 3-ingredient craft chocolate maker, or if you're throwing milk in there as well as an ingredient, then you're essentially making second generation chocolate. I don't necessarily know that I would call it second generation chocolate. In fact, I wouldn't, because you're making specialty chocolate. That's what I would recommend doing. But here are the characteristics you can talk about it, right? So production process, right? So the chocolate is made using Barry Callebaut's cocoa cultivation and craft principle, which is just marketing speak. So be careful when you adopt a trend, is what's going on here, is that you understand what the trend is about, what the language of the trend is, how it applies to you, how it might be being used disingenuously. So it's important to know. But I wanted to get that through there, just to give everybody a quick overview on what that meant. And that's the news, and things that have occurred to me. And I added a couple of things since I posted this in the last couple of days. So let's get down here to the bottom in the member discussion, and let's get to what it is that Mark posted. So Mark, I hope you are still watching today. So first number question. Craft bean supply seems to be low, limited access across wholesalers. What's your read in the forecast in the near term? Okay, so the answer is the cocoa supply is going to remain tight for the foreseeable future. And that foreseeable future is at least the next year. Prices are going to be high, although we've gone from 12,000, as you pointed out, down to 10,500 or thereabouts. We're still historically high. So Thomas, you make an interesting point here. Did I talk about China? Commodity beans are commodity beans. And so unless you can tell me that the beans from China are priced lower than the commodity market, which I don't have any evidence that they are, China coming online they're not going to go from the relatively small production and exports they did in the last 2 years to anything, I don't think, to enough production to be able to influence the price of cocoa in the short term. That's my read based on what I know about how much they are producing or produced last year, right? And how long it's going to take them to get into production, right? So they're also notoriously going to be non-EUDR compliant because they don't allow any kind of polygon mapping within the country. And so maybe if I'm a U.S. supplier, okay. So Thomas, this isn't really helpful to me right now. The article Mark Donaldson posted in Ivory Coast, if you have a link to that you'd like to share with me, that's great. In the middle of an episode, it's not going to do me much. I can certainly talk to Mark about doing it. He's been a guest here on PodSafe Chocolate in the past. But again, where we are right now when it comes to chocolate has to do with a systemic lack of investment in the entire cocoa supply chain for more than 50 years, since the 1970s, which is the last time the price blew up. Hey, Thomas, no worry to apologize, but if you have a link to the article, please share please share that link. I don't necessarily know that I can respond to it in real time because I'd have to read through the article, but I can certainly respond to it in the comments, which I am happy to do. Put the link in the comments on this post rather than here live, and I can, so that everybody can see the link, even if they're not watching now, and they can I can respond to it then, which I'm happy to do. But no need to apologize. It's just I'm doing this stream of conscious, and I can't respond to it with the kind of detail. What I'm doing is that Mark posted these things about 15 minutes before we went live, and I wanted to get to them. So craft bean supply seems to be low limited across all wholesalers. The answer is absolutely right. It is limited across all wholesalers. And one of the challenges that craft chocolate makers have, specialty chocolate makers, is they don't tend to buy a lot of beans, and they don't have the resources to invest in large quantities of beans. So you have no way to insulate yourself from the volatility in the market. And that's unfortunately part of the ethos of, you may be directly trading, right? But you as a maker, right, don't have the direct connection with the farmer, usually with a intermediary. So Uncommon, Meridian, Darnhauer, whoever you're buying your beans from. So you do have that disintermediation, which you need to worry about. So, do you personally know the names of the farmers? Have you been and visited the farmers? For me, if you don't physically go and visit your farmers and been to their farm and make a long-term commitment to the farm, you're not doing direct trade, right? Somebody else is doing direct trade on your behalf, but you're not doing direct trade. So, the forecast in the near term, I don't see any major changes in the market in terms of pricing in the next year that is going to be consistent. I don't think we're going to see a consistent downward trend. We'll see lots of volatility between the $9,000 and $12,000 range. I don't think we're going to get anywhere near close to the all-time high adjusted for inflation. If we take the 1977 high, which is about 57 US, that's about $27,000 right now. I don't think we'll come close to that. But I don't think we will come, if we settle down, if we were talking about this time next year and the price had settled down to 6,000, I would be really surprised. I would see it more, I would see it, somewhere between 8 and 10. Just that's where it is. And so if you are doing something, if you're making chocolate, you need to find a way to make products which contain less of your most expensive ingredient. That's it. All right, I think. Any updates on the situation in Bolivia and the effects of the fires? I did see something from Volker recently that said he's really proud that his chocolate bar was tested and it has extremely low levels of mercury, of cadmium and lead. I didn't see anything from Volker that says we are expecting any particular impact on the harvest yet. They're in the middle of the harvest right now, as I recall, and so I will follow up with Volker in the next month or so, and we'll figure out what's going on there. Right. So the second question: are I seeing chocolate makers raising their retail prices? Futures prices today hit 10,600 a ton, down from earlier, but supply seems to be tightening. What's your read? So the answer to that question is yeah, right? I mean, at some point you can no longer absorb all of the price increases. In fact, the only thing that is in your control, right, is how much time you spend making something. That is what is in your control, right? So if you are going to remain profitable, right, or turn a profit for the first time, right, if you are going to remain profitable, right, without really going and raising your prices, what you're going to have to do is figure out how a way to reduce your manufacturing costs, right? And so it could be spending less time cracking and winnowing. I notice you received, set up, and tuned your new DCM Breeze. Um, and So yeah, you made an investment. It's roughly $5,000 to do that. But what you're doing is you're getting much better yield and spending much less time cracking and winnowing your beans, right? And that's what's going to. It is an investment, so there is an ROI period, but it shows up the next batch of chocolate and every batch of chocolate that you make, right? You're spending less time, right, doing something. Oh, I can devote that time to something else, right? So keep track of how much time you're spending, assign a value, like in terms of dollars per hour burdened, for the time you spend on doing things, so you can figure out how your labor contributes to cost of goods sold, right? So, but yeah, I mean, raising the retail bar prices. And here's something that I want to say that, Mark you and I have talked about this on a number of occasions, and I talk about it generally, is, gosh, why are you guys focused on making chocolate bars? If you're a bean to bar chocolate maker, you've put these blinkers, right, which says I make bars for my chocolate. Make brownies, right? Make other things with your chocolate covered coffee beans, chocolate covered whatever, right? Do enrobed items, do bonbons, do something which has got, less Y bars, right? It is just insane to me, right? That what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, I'm going to do the same thing, right? You want to give your customers more than one reason to come into your store and buy from you and know your brand. You don't want to necessarily sell a product that goes, "Ooh, this is so good. I'm only going to take one tiny little square, and I'm going to wait a week or a month until I have another tiny little square of it." You want to make things that people are going to walk into the shop and they're going to eat the whole thing, hopefully when they're in the car, before they actually leave the parking lot, right? And they'll come back tomorrow or next week and buy some more. You need to be thinking about what are those things. If you do not make things which are priced for children and are things that children will want to eat, so that if a parent comes in with a kid in tow, and the kids goes, "Mommy, mommy, mommy," or "Daddy, daddy, daddy," or "Babysitter, babysitter," or older brother, whoever says, "Buy me that," and it's $1, right? You need to do that, right? Even if all it is a chocolate dipped pretzel rolled in nonpareils. I mean, you'd be surprised what that means. I mean, it could be a gourmet artisan pretzel. It could be, your chocolate. Maybe it's not a nonpareil, but it's something which has got a better ingredients list than that. But move away from bars. Move away from bars and see how moving away from bars helps your bottom line. It's really important. Supplies seem to be tightening. You don't know the meaning of the word tightening. Again, with the incoming administration, if they start putting 10, 25% tariffs onto things which are currently not taxed on import, cocoa beans, cocoa paste, cocoa butter, right? Things like that. Most forms of cocoa powder are imported into the United States with tariff free. If there's a blanket 25% increase, you don't know what the meaning of price increase is right now. You don't know what about supply tightening is all about. You don't know. If you voted for the man, you just basically may have voted yourself out of business, right? I just want to let you know. I'm sorry, whatever your politics are. That's my opinion about them. Um, so Mark, 2024 was a lesson learned. We need to buy and stock more raw materials. It's the lifeblood of the business. Absolutely. I mean, supply chain disruptions are supply chain eruptions. We need a new panner. We are going to be talking about that. Fortunato made what shift, Thomas? I'm interested in knowing what shift you think Fortunato made. I've also not been impressed with the marketing communications that people have shared with me around what Fortunato is doing. Yeah, I just, yeah, but I'm interested in a little more detail about what you think, what shift Fortunato made, and what you're responding to in terms of what I talked about. So, Mark, another question from you is: two well-known Utah, Colorado chocolate makers are either closing their doors or are up for sale. Is this a trend? So, I think that anybody who's been listening to me for a long period of time knows that I think a lot of chocolate makers are chronically underfunded and have been from the beginning. Just the way their business was set up, they didn't have the resources really necessary um, to expand the brand, right? If your brand was focused around, oh, the more time I spend, the better it is. So I'm going to hand inspect every single cocoa bean to make sure it's perfect before I roast it, right? So if that is the ethics of your brand, then you're in for a huge shock, right? Because, um, okay. Um, So you're in for a huge shock. You're in for a huge shock about that. So two well-known Utah, Colorado chocolate makers are either closing the doors or up for sale. Is this a trend? When it stops being fun, I mean, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong, right? And if you're doing this and it's no longer fun, right? Why are you still doing it? So selling your business or closing the doors, right, and trying to get as much as you can for the physical assets and or the brand assets makes an enormous amount of sense, because being in a job that is labor intensive and requires the kind of focus and attention to detail that making good chocolate does, and if you're not having fun doing it, it's going to show, right? And so is this a trend? The answer is a lot of people are. So if I was 20 years old and was thinking about having to put kids through college in 20 years, then would be this something that I would recommend people do? Again, not if you're not properly financed and you don't know what it is that you're doing. So, it just may be that so understanding what the trend is the trend closing down or selling? What's driving it? It'd be the thing. So number one is I'm not profitable anymore. So I don't want to lose money, right? And the other one is I'm no longer having fun doing it, right? And I would look to see what you think the basis of that trend is going to be, right? If you think either of those things is going to be the case. So the challenge we have is that there have been very few examples where a big chocolate company has bought a small chocolate company and been successful with it, or a one craft chocolate company has purchased the assets and brand of another craft chocolate company and been successful with it. And so right now, unfortunately, the time to sell a craft chocolate business would have been 2 years ago. It's going to be much, much harder now to do that, because making the case for profitability and the value of the brand is going to be challenging. But if you wanted to share with me privately, Mark, who these people are, I may know people who might be interested in it, depending upon who the company is. I think I know one of them, but let me know and I can figure that out. And hoping one of them is not you. Anyway, a last question. Can I provide a quick review of entry point tempering machines? Any new ones on the market? Any recommendations? So, right, entry point tempering machines, it all depends on capacity. So an entry point tempering machine is a ChocoVision Rev 1 or Rev 2, right? So and there are a lot of people who started their businesses with machines that size, or an ACMC machine. There are a lot of them were made and a lot of them are used. And so, but if you're talking about, I want to be able to temper 25 kilos of chocolate a day and make stuff with that 25 kilos of chocolate a day, then you really are looking at bowl-shaped batch tempering machines. So whatever the brand is, or ACMC, not ACMC, or a wheel machine from JKV. I think the sort of least expensive, higher capacity machines are around these wheel-based machines. However, they're for flood and scrape applications. So if what you want to do is you want to fill chocolate bar, if you want to fill bar molds and you're underfilling your mold, so you have a 100-gram mold and you're putting 60 grams of chocolate in it, flooding and scraping doesn't work for you. So you need to find a depositing method. So it could be putting the molding on scale and then, filling it from okay. So what I want to differentiate is between, batch tempering, which is, I believe, what you're doing using which is what you're doing, and then continuous tempering for which you have a measured depositor, right? So what I can do is I can put a discrete amount of chocolate into each mold cavity. If what we're doing is we're talking about bar molds, right? Because that's a point. So um, again, it's a capacity issue, which depends on what you're doing. So at the point that you're talking about, I only need 25 kilograms a day, and maybe only need 25 kilograms in the morning. And what I want to do is I'm working with 6 or 7 different chocolates. Some of the chocolates have inclusions in them. There are lots of things which go into the question. Are there any new ones in the market? Any recommendations? The answer is no. There are no new ones on the market. There are no new ones on. Nobody is innovating in this space. I think in lots of ways, people are making incremental improvements around it. So FBM introduces a feature, Selmy introduces their version of this feature, Gammy introduces their version of Selmy's version of FBM feature, and Pomati, and it just goes around and around and around. But in terms of, substantive innovations on how this stuff is being done, the answer is no. And they want machines which are going to sell for above a certain price. So if it doesn't sell for more than 10,000 euros, they don't care, because they can't make money in the long run on it. I mean, this is one of the challenges, is they need to be profitable businesses. I mean, so FBM does make a batch tempering machine, right? So as far as batch tempering machines, it's not bad. One of the reasons why it's more interesting than other batch tempering machines is it actually has a cooling unit around it, so they're not using blowing ambient air. There's a stir, and they've got a cooling unit which brings the chocolate down under temperature. But that's now, I want to say, 8 years old, 9 years old. It's certainly nothing new. And then, once you get done with that batch, you need to start over with another batch, which means you want to have melted chocolate or particular. So nobody is going and taking a look at, oh my gosh, how do I go about doing this, right? And doing it differently, maybe doing it better. And what does that mean for, how do I make it cost effective? I wish I could do more with you. I am working with a Turkish manufacturer, and I've shared this with you, Mark, on doing a number of different things. And so they're right now working on a high-end tempering machine, but it's 120 kilos an hour, which you probably don't need. And it's not designed for bar depositing, so it's more designed for large-scale enrobing. So not going to help you right now, but we are discussing the idea of making like an FBM-like machine, a Selmy-like machine. So it's a bowl-based continuous tempering machine. And then specifically taking a look at some of the things that make those machines difficult and expensive. So these are things that I am aware of and I'm trying to do, but we're not going to have anything in the next 90 days that can be done. So I know where it is. You and I have discussed privately where things are going. I would need to. We need to have that discussion in private to know more precisely exactly. So I was going to ask for an update on the progress and the relationships. Yeah, we're talking. So yeah, I'm working with this manufacturer. I mean, so for people who may not know, I have a relationship with a Turkish equipment manufacturer who is going to be my point of contact in Turkey for anybody who's interested in custom polycarbonate molds. So if you're interested in custom polycarbonate molds and you want relatively inexpensive pricing on them, that is something that I'm going to be able to offer through this new relationship that I have with the Turkish manufacturer. And then we are also working on things like a lower cost panning machine than is offered by either Selmy or FBM. We are looking at an FBM/Selmy style tempering machine, which is got a different physical. It uses the same technology, but the design is very, very different designed specifically around make it easier to clean, so we are trying to address, the mechanical issues of, oh, could we put a volumetric depositor on this? So a true volumetric depositor for the first time on an Archimedes screw, right, continuous tempering machine. I mean, the answer is yeah, it's possible to do. And so hopefully we'll be the first people who do it. We'll figure that out as time goes on. We're also looking at a small fluid bed roaster, specifically designed for cocoa. Right. So those are 3 things that I'm working on. Hopefully we'll be able to bring, because one of my goals is, how do we help chocolate makers spend less time doing the things that they're doing? So how do we reduce the cost of labor and make them more effective and efficient? So that's part of what it is that I am doing over the course of the next little while, in addition to offering editorial and press and PR services. So yeah, you can take advantage of the 20 some odd years that I've been doing this, writing about it professionally for 3.5, for International Confectionery Magazine as their technical editor, which I'm no longer doing, but being able to take my understanding and be able to help you craft your marketing language. I'm not going to manage your social media programs. There are other people who do that well, but if you want to talk about language, and how to talk about your product, and how to put together press releases and get your press releases distributed, those are things that I can do. All right. And with that, just a quick out. I mean, so there's a lot of stuff talked about today, a lot of coverage. And I know that I've been talking New York fast, not Arizona drawl, New York fast. So this is the post for today's episode of The Chocolate Life. All of the links, with the exception of 1 or 2, I think the NOCA link is something I'm going to have to add in, are on the page. And so you can listen to this and you can review and click the links and, go see what you think. They're all here on the page for this morning, right? And this is the homepage of The Chocolate Life right now, right? If you are not a member, you can go click on the account button, because this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by you, right? The members of The Chocolate Life. And that's how I keep the lights going. And it's how I make sure that I can do all of the things that I'm doing for you. So there is always a free membership tier. So yeah, free is in no cost to you whatsoever. But if you do have the resources to support the work that I'm doing, and as a matter of fact, after last week's episode, the previous episode, there were 2 new members joined, which I thought was really, really nice. So thank you to the new members who did that. I'm going to be putting out a new member newsletter sometime over the next couple of days. We have the monthly member AMA, which is a week from Sunday. So that's coming up as well. So if you are a member, you'll get that member newsletter, which will have the link to the member AMA. So just really important to know that those are some of the things that you get. And I got to sign off as I always sign off, with a reminder that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, let me do this. If you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao. And I look forward to seeing you.